I happen to be sitting next to an EFF leader in Gauteng. His name is Nkululeko Dunga, newly minted chairperson of the EFF here. How do those words sit with you, sir? That journalists are afraid of you, and that's why you easily go around insulting people because you know you're not going to get pushback. How does that sit with you?
Well, it's a narrative that he wishes to advance, which is completely not true, because if that was the fear, we wouldn't be sitting here with you today and having a cordial discussion in terms of the posture of Gauteng and the nature of governance in general. But we do, however, make no apology for our stance where we see journalism playing into the political landscape and taking political positions. Whereas in the EFF has always been criticized by journalists and media houses in the Fourth Estate in general, which is still owned by white monopoly capital and still being puppeteered all the way from Stellenbosch, particularly some of the media houses. So we have taken a position where the media in essence are not our enemies, because that's a proper platform to engage with society and to have a relationship with them. However, whereas in we find those discrepancies, as we have mentioned, where they play into the political landscape of the country, we'll draw that to the attention of society.
All right. Well, I can tell you that I am certainly not puppeteered from Stellenbosch. I'm nobody's puppet, and that's why I can tell your leader, live on air, that he's lying. And he lied when he said John Block was out of prison. John Block is still very much in prison. If he wants to challenge me, he can come back here and prove that John Block is out of prison. So we know about your leadership when they do tell fibs to South African public. But that's not why we're here. We're here to discuss the legacy of David Makhura. How do you see it as the EFF? What has he achieved? What has he not achieved? What's he failed at?
Yeah, revolutionaries don't lie.
We've moved on.
Yeah, no, look, in terms of the legacy of Makura ever since his inception as a premier, one would have to recollect and relive the moments even prior to him assuming office, because he's always been at the center of the leadership question in the ANC. He's a former secretary of the province and migrated sort of into governance and ultimately becoming a premier. So in terms of the decision making and the posture of the ANC, he's always been at the center of it, at least for the past, one can assume, 15 years at most, in terms of influence. Horrible, absolutely horrible for the citizens of Gauteng. I mean, you saw the inception of e-tolls and the continuation thereof, even under the objection of society. The road infrastructure is extremely terrible. I mean, you drive down the M2, M1, and you consistently are met with traffic throughout the entire day, continuously so. Now, for an organization that has pitted itself to advancing economic development, how then do you not have an infrastructure, particularly on roads, that can easily move goods that are being manufactured and so forth? We have seen the dilapidated infrastructure of schooling and education. So much money being spent, in actual fact, I think it's roughly about 38.7 to almost 40% of the entire budget of Gauteng goes towards the Department of Education. But we still have a lot of schools that are dysfunctional. We still have a lot of schools without proper ovulation facilities, without water, without electricity, not servicing them, without proper infrastructure.
Yeah.
We have seen millions of money being spent on housing projects, and those houses are still not yet allocated. I mean, you look at, there's a project called John Dube in Egoruleni, marred with extreme levels of corruption in terms of the allocation of housing. We have seen there's currently a backlog of about, it can go to up to 3 million in terms of the housing backlog. Currently, they are saying that it's standing at roughly at about 1.5 million, with about almost 300,000 of the housing backlog dating as far back as 1996. Now, that is the legacy that he leaves behind. Collapsed health department. We cannot not speak about it.
Yeah.
It has completely collapsed. I mean, we've been listening to him here speak about that no one is complaining about the Department of Health and the professionalism that is attributed to it. But that's a nonsensical statement, and I think you ought to tell him that he's actually lying. He's the one who's lying, because one, you've got 1.6 billion in litigation against the Department of Health, particularly on negligence. We know that the Department of Health is understaffed. We know that the ambulances are not functioning. We know that Telomokharane, Tembisa Hospital, Parakwanath Hospital are in dire need of beds. They're in dire need of medical equipments that have aged way beyond 15 years.
Right.
So we know all of those things, and that is the legacy that they are leaving behind. But they come and they chant that all is well.
Well, that's why we challenge the government of the day, and we do so thoroughly on this show. But are you not completely disregarding what some view as progress that has been made, particularly around job creation? They speak about economic zones that have opened up in Gauteng, forward, one of them in Tshwane, where people have been absorbed into employment. At least that's the argument being put forward by his party, that is a legacy that you cannot shirk off.
No, well, look, if you were to be honest and we look at the functioning of the economic zones and the attribute that they've had on economic activity is extremely minimal. So it's okay for them to highlight that there have been an establishment of economic zones. As to whether it equates to economic activity and particularly employment of, in generally, the black rejected masses who are in requirement of work is something else. We are standing currently as Gauteng with the unemployment rate standing at 44%. How can you celebrate having established an economic zone that has not attributed directly to employment?
So you're saying that there's been jobless growth in Gauteng if the ANC says we've created jobs but people are not being absorbed into those jobs?
Without a doubt.
Okay.
Without a doubt.
Right.
Including the patterns of ownership of where these economic zones are. I mean, if you are still giving the space for economic activity to big establishments such as Ford and BMW and all your well-established companies and white-owned companies, that is, which does not equate to jobs. You have also neglected to establish the working class and to establish new industries and small, medium enterprises to actually work and engage in the economy.
Let me put this final one to you, and very briefly, if you can. We are out of time. Well and good to criticize because you sit in the opposition benches. You're not in control of any governance or at least structure of government. If you were a government of the day as the EFF in Gauteng, what is it that you would do differently in order to kickstart that all-important economic activity that we need for people to absorb into jobs? What is it that you can do?
Yeah. Well, the first and foremost thing is that land is the economy in itself. So you would have to offer a conducive environment that would equate to land distribution to people who are going to need the land to actually carry out economic activity. That would be the most fundamental one for agricultural purposes, for manufacturing purposes, and for even habitation. So that's the first point. The second point is that we ought to move to reindustrialization. Because at some point in South Africa and in Gauteng, we were the industrial hub of Africa, even if you can put it that way. So that's where we need to now re-strategize. We need to ensure that manufacturing is at the center and at the epitome of infrastructure development and economic activity.
Right.
We need to also localize. Because the most fundamental aspect of it is to note that government has a lot of expenditure, and once you localize that expenditure to small, medium enterprises, it will equate to jobs, because the main functions of small, medium enterprises, at least for now, is also seen to be job creation.
Indeed, and I'm sorry to rush you, but I'm sure you've got lots to propose as to what it is that the EFF can do to change the fortunes of people of Gauteng, many of whom are jobless, as you said. But thank you very much for coming through and giving your thoughts about the legacy of the outgoing Premier of Gauteng, David Makhura. That's Nkululeko Dunga. He is the new EFF leader in Gauteng.